Welcome to the Stewardship Network's monthly webcast. My name is Rob Luzinski, and I'm the community coordinator at the Stewardship Network. And we are so happy to have you for our July 2024 webcast. A little bit about us. TSN is a 501c3 nonprofit organization with an award-winning 20-year history. We are now serving 20 plus place-based TSN member communities across the Great Lakes, with emerging presences around the country. And our free TSN webcasts happen on the second Wednesday of each month in the Eastern Time Zone's noon hour. Our mission is to connect, equip, and mobilize people and organizations to care for land and water in their communities. We connect the specialized knowledge we've collected from and for TSN member communities, and we share it as widely as possible. We equip, we remove hurdles for TSN member communities so they can pour thousands of annual work hours into their ecosystems. And we mobilize. Through our TSN member communities, we make collaborative ecological stewardship accessible for all. And speaking of mobilize, if you have been following TSN over the last couple months, there is no chance that you haven't heard of what I'm about to talk about next, which is one of our most prized and appreciated programs that we put on every year, the TSN Spring Challenge. So since April 10th, we have been encouraging folks to submit their hours and be a part of this wonderful initiative. And we really appreciate everybody that has taken the time to do so. Overall, this year was our favorite since the program rebooted in 2022. We had lots of early reporting, and that kept things fun and inspirational the whole time, rather than folks coming in and reporting all at the end. So we really appreciate everybody that continued to stay engaged for the entirety of the program. We would love to thank our boost donors, REI, Zingerman's, Cabela's, Huron Clinton Metro Parks, and many wonderful local artists, authors, and friends for all of your contributions. The prize pantry is a really fun, relatively new aspect of the Spring Challenge, and we do see that it encourages folks to report early and often. So thank you to everybody that contributes to make the prize pantry possible. So we set a pretty high bar last year. We had over 50,000 hours of stewardship reported. We had over 13,000 total participants, which was our highest single year total ever. And we documented over 1.6 million in work hour value poured into our local ecosystems. So when I say we generated, I mean all of us, everybody that contributed. Really amazing numbers there. But we were a little bit nervous about 2024 to see how everything was going to shake out. It turned out pretty good, we must say. So we had almost 59,000 total hours of stewardship reported, and that is a new record for this era of the Spring Challenge. We are so excited, cannot believe all of the enthusiasm and how wonderful it is to have met that amazing milestone. We had 13,521 total participants, which is just barely short of our record from last year, so we're still pretty proud of that. And that accounts for almost 2 million in work hour value poured into our local ecosystems. That is absolutely amazing. And we are honored that folks were willing and able to share their work with us this spring. And we hope that you all feel proud of those numbers, because that is really remarkable. So a little bit of history. Since 2008, we've had 454 total hours of stewardship reported, over 52,000 total participants, and over 11.7 million in work hour value poured into our local ecosystem. That is absolutely incredible, and we look forward to continuing for another 20 years doing this program, and I can't wait to see how those numbers continue to grow every year. Now we are going to announce some of our winners of our cups. So first is the Community Cup, which is awarded to the TSN member community that reports the most total stewardship hours. It was a close one this year, but we are proud to announce that Huron Arbor Cluster has won the Community Cup. Congratulations. And I will say that the Great Lakes Islands Alliance was close behind for the second year in a row, so they might try to make a comeback in 2025. Next, we have the Root Cup, which is awarded to the organization reporting the most total pounds of invasive plants removed. And we are very happy to say it is the Huron Arbor Cluster. This was a big upset, actually, over the West Michigan Conservation Network, who also had an amazing season of removing invasive species. So congrats to both of those groups, and especially congrats to the Huron Arbor Cluster for winning the Root Cup this year. The Partner Cup is awarded to the organization reporting the most total stewardship hours from outside of our network family. And we are very proud to announce Milwaukee Riverkeepers has won this year. And that is back-to-back wins for Milwaukee Riverkeepers. So want everybody to keep an eye out, and you external partners of the Stewardship Network, make sure you get at it next year and see if we can challenge the crown. So the Teacher Cup is awarded to the organization reporting the most total education hours. And we are very happy to announce the Eco Center has won that. Really proud of having education as its own category, and really happy to document all of the important work that folks do in education and advocacy in the stewardship space. So congratulations to the Eco Center. And the Solo Cup, it's awarded to the unaffiliated individual or family reporting the most stewardship hours. So if you're out there just doing it alone and contributing to this larger initiative, but you don't have a collaborative in your area, this one's for you. And we're very proud to announce Sheila D from Dundas, Ontario is our winner. And Sheila actually joined us, I think it was just a few years ago, for the first time at one of our webcasts. And now we are seeing her win the Solo Cup. So we are super excited to have her as a part of the network, and want to say, share a big congratulations to her. And we also want to share a little quote that she has about her participation in the Spring Challenge. My passion for rectifying my baby boom generation's carbon footprint is evident in my yard that now, after 8 years, is all genetically local native species with some 600 plus plants, shrubs, and trees, similar to what this land was like pre-settlement. That is absolutely amazing, and definitely an inspiration to all of us. So congratulations, Sheila, and we hope to see you participating in the challenge again next year. So we have a new honor this year, the Inspiration Cup, that is awarded to the organization who sent us the most incredible photographs all season long. And I have to say that it wasn't much of a competition, because this group really was sending excellent photos from the beginning all the way through the challenge. Congratulations to TSN member community, Lake St. Clair SISMA. So amazing, all of the work that Amanda and all of her collaborators are doing out there. And we really appreciate all the documentation. It's how we help tell the story of the challenge and all of the great stewardship work that's happening within our member communities and also beyond. So congratulations. So yeah, I mean, look at this. Look at all of these wonderful photos that represent all of the great work that everybody did during the Spring Challenge this year. It is absolutely incredible for us to be a part of this work with you and to document and share your stories with the world. So we hope that you had a great time participating, and we really hope that you'll join us again next year for the Spring Challenge. Once again, there it is. And you can find all of this information at stewardshipnetwork.org/spring. And you can also find at that same link information about next year when the time comes. But wait, there is more. At stewardshipnetwork.org/donate, we encourage you to visit, because in celebration of TSN Spring, we have a donor who has offered a 1-to-1 match. If we can raise $10,000 before July ends, they will add another $10,000 to that total. Opportunities like this are what keep TSN going and ensure that next year's Spring Challenge keeps up this great momentum. We really appreciate all of the financial support that we are very graciously received from our supporters. And so if you can spare it, we would really appreciate you visiting stewardshipnetwork.org/donate. And please contribute what you can, $5, $10, $100, whatever you can do. It all makes a difference. And we continue to be inspired by your amazing work. So it is an honor to be in this space with you. And we hope that you enjoyed this year's Spring Challenge. So with that, let's get on to the main event. Christine Carmichael of Fair Forest Consulting And the presentation today is Growing Towards Equitable Urban Forest Stewardship. So with that, Christine, I will let you take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Rob. I'll go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. So thank you all so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk to you about this very important topic about growing towards equitable urban and community forestry stewardship. Just a little introduction. This is a picture of me with a tree planting group in Detroit, Michigan. I'm the founder and principal of Fair Forest Consulting. You can go to my website if you'd like more information about some of the work I've done. I have my PhD in forestry from Michigan State University, and that's where I completed my dissertation research on no tree requests, which I'm going to talk a short bit about today. And this is a picture of me with a group planting trees in Detroit, and we were looking at why people turn down free street trees and what we can learn from that. And I recently integrated equity into urban forest plans in Oakland, California, Holyoke, Massachusetts, and Ann Arbor, Michigan. So I wanted to start with just a little bit of historical context for what we're walking into. What it starts with here is the Great Migration, which not necessarily a lot of people know about, but from 1910 to 1970, more than 6 million African Americans migrated from the South to the Northeast, the Midwest, and the West to escape racism, the threat of violence, and to seek jobs and educational opportunities in industrial cities. Unfortunately, during this time, they faced racist housing practices called redlining. So in the 1930s, in the midst of this great migration, the federal government raided neighborhoods in urban areas to help mortgage lenders assess risk for new investments. Unfortunately, though, they rated neighborhoods low based on race and ethnicity, the proportion of people of color living there. New research shows in 108 cities that today that those red line neighborhoods are often hotter than neighborhoods within the same city. And partly that's because there was a disinvestment in the trees. So there's fewer trees and fewer healthier trees in these neighborhoods. And that's the legacy. And during this great migration, you had the response of white residents at the time was what we call white flight to the suburbs. And associated with that was money flight. So this is just a map showing population in Detroit and Vancouver. You can see just looking at the blue lines, the metro Detroit, the suburbs of Detroit exponentially grew, peaking in the 1960s with white flight. So basically you had this huge disinvestment and then at the same time, the contraction of the city of Detroit. So you see the light blue line. The city of Detroit population peaked at about 1.85 million and then went all the way down to 650,000. So you have a lot of vacant properties, a lot of areas where trees are not being very well cared for. And this was partly around the time of the race riots or race rebellion. So this is a really important history to be aware of because as the money fled to the suburbs, the canopy declined. You can see this picture from Detroit. And this didn't just happen in Detroit, this happened in places like Baltimore and all kinds of other cities across the United States. So the tree canopy declined and it was predominantly in communities of color, again, where this redlining and disinvestment happened. And this is really important because, as many of us know, nature matters to health. Increased green space promotes healthier births, it reduces all-cause mortality and decreases stress. There's all different types of benefits associated with nature. And this is really important to be aware of that Hispanics are twice as likely to visit the emergency department for asthma as compared to non-Hispanic whites. And in 2014 alone, African Americans were almost 3 times more likely to die from asthma than asthma-related causes than the white population. So this is this is getting down to public health at a very fundamental level and differences. And so in the midst of all of this is when I started this research on no tree requests. So in response to this historical context of redlining and decrease in tree cover, nonprofit organizations like the Greening of Detroit started to try to put more trees in these neighborhoods and try to rectify the history that had happened here. But when I went there, 25% of the residents that were eligible for a free tree said no, no thank you. And so my job was to figure out why and what can we be doing to address this issue. How can we plant more trees and make sure that people are actually wanting trees in those neighborhoods and that they're thriving. And that's really what we're focusing on today. I did a lot of qualitative methods. That's my primary approach to research, is qualitative, meaning that I document people's words and experiences to try to understand the different dynamics going on. So I conducted interviews with residents, with staff. I took field notes at community meetings and tree planting events. If you want to know more about the methods that I used, feel free to ask. But what I found was that heritage narratives, the stories about the history that I just talked about, were really important in determining people's response to tree planting and tree stewardship now. What heritage narratives are is it's a broad rendition of a community's history and the character of its people, both past and present, and its trials and triumphs over time. And the reason this is important is because when I talk to people about trees and why they want trees or not, they tell stories about their community's history from their perspective. And this helps them to make sense of current challenges and options for solutions. And I'm going to demonstrate what that means here. So what I found was the staff, the Greening of Detroit, they basically prioritize planting trees over having dialogue with residents. And so this is a picture of a door hanger that was distributed on people's doors about 2 weeks before a tree planting. And you can see it describes the different benefits of trees. And then also on the back, it talks about how can you help the tree thrive by watering the tree. So basically trying to tell people, here's the benefits, here's why you should accept a tree, and please help us by stewarding the tree. And one of the staff members said, we tend to do this during a time of day we know people will not be home because of the amount of time that it will take to actively engage in those conversations. And then a board member said, we're just constantly educating people about why what we're doing is important and about what they sort of give up by refusing a tree that we're offering. If they don't know what they're missing, they've never had those benefits, all they see is the negatives. So this is a heritage narrative. This is a story about the community from the perspective of a board member who's basically saying, we think that people don't understand and don't have experience with the benefits of trees. All they have experience with is the negatives, and that's why they're turning down trees. So we need to educate people through things like these door hangers about why they should accept trees and why trees are beneficial. But when I talked to residents who submitted no tree requests, they said, actually, I love trees. It makes things beautiful. It makes shade. I love trees. There's no problem with trees. The problem is they have to be maintained. And in our neighborhood, they're not being maintained. So a huge stewardship challenge here. It wasn't actually the fact that people didn't think that trees were beneficial. It was that the maintenance had been neglected for so long. And if we look at that history of redlining and disinvestment from communities and lack of services for trees, it's not surprising that this is the experience that people had, and this is what they were concerned about and why they were turning down trees. And it was really a collaborative challenge. Maintenance and stewardship, I think you can use the words sort of interchangeably, but they may mean different things. It's a challenge for all, and it requires more collaborative attention. And what I found was that the staff said, I think it's really sexy to plant trees and fundable to plant trees, but it's not sexy to maintain or monitor those trees. And similarly, the residents said, even though it's city property, we're going to end up having to care for it and raking leaves and God knows whatever else we might have to do. So it really wasn't about people, whether they thought trees were beneficial or not. It was about what's going to happen in the long run with the stewardship of these trees, and really not trusting that those trees would be very well cared for. And based on past experience, they didn't have reason to believe that the trees would be cared for. This is a picture next to this is a vacant property that's overgrown, and the trees aren't doing very well either. They have been neglected. And what I found was that the people who did not want a tree identified greater challenges with neighborhood property upkeep because, again, when you have that huge population decline, you have a lot of vacant properties and someone has to maintain those or else it becomes overgrown. The people that didn't want a tree also mentioned that they had fewer resources to help address maintenance issues and disappointing results from lack of involvement in actions that affect the neighborhood appearance and function. So by looking at what happened and what was problematic, we can see what we need to be doing differently. So we need to be helping people with property upkeep, helping find the resources needed to address the maintenance issues, and involving people more in decisions about their neighborhood. In fact, 40% of the residents that I interviewed said they would have accepted a tree if they had a choice of the species planted and or the tree was maintained. So this is a huge finding. We need to be thinking about then how can we give people choices, involvement in the process, and how can we support the stewardship or maintenance? And this is a part of a framework that Clark and colleagues put out in 1997. They said that to have a sustainable urban forest that continues to produce benefits at the same level over time, you need a healthy vegetative resource, so a healthy tree, but you also need a supportive community and an adequate maintenance regime. And what I found was that whether you have an adequate maintenance regime will determine whether you have a supportive community. So, what is equity and why do we need it? Well, this picture really demonstrates it well. In the top left corner, you see inequality. This is a metaphor. The tree is leaning to the left, and the person on the left gets the apple or the fruit or the benefits from that tree. The person on the right does not. This is the current situation where you have many communities of color in particular and lower income communities that have fewer trees and less benefits from trees than whiter and wealthier communities. So if you move to the right, equality would say that we provide equal assistance to everyone regardless of their circumstance. So that means providing everyone with the same size ladder, the same assistance. For example, a city might have a 311 line that residents can call to report a tree health issue. But as you can see, hopefully you can see, for the person on the right, it's not enough. It's not enough to get to the to have just the same level of support because of this history that I talked about of disinvestment. The need is greater in those communities. And so that's when we get down to equity here, which is basically providing custom tools that identify and address the inequality. So this means we're providing more financial support for both tree planting and tree care and stewardship over time, technical guidance and support so people can be involved in the decisions about the trees in their neighborhood, which they've previously been excluded from, as well as equipment and physical labor, especially if you have older residents or if you have residents with disabilities or other physical limitations. That's part of equity, and that's providing the right size ladder so that people can get the benefits of trees. And ideally, what we do is by doing this equity approach, we can fix the system, we can straighten the tree, we can make sure that then more trees are planted and cared for in these low canopy areas. And then we lead that will lead us to justice, where essentially, hopefully, all communities have equal access to the benefits of trees, regardless of race or income or other characteristics. So the idea with equity is that everyone gets access to the custom tools or resources that they need to succeed in the collective goal, which is improving the tree canopy and its distribution. This is a definition of environmental justice that also gets at this point about it's the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, programs, and policies. This is from the EPA in 2022. So essentially, the only way to achieve fair urban forestry is through what we call procedural justice. That's the meaningful inclusion in decision making. And we're going to see some strategies as I proceed through the presentation for doing this. But it's meaningful inclusion in decision making about the environment. And I really like this graphic from Ricardo Levins Morales saying, nothing about us without us is for us. So the meaningful inclusion means we involve people in why are we planting trees in the first place, determining what is our vision, what are our collective goals? Are we trying to increase shade near bus stops? Are we trying to improve food security by planting fruit trees in community gardens and community spaces? What are the goals, not of like outside people or outside groups, but of the people that are actually living in those communities? and then involving them specifically in the tactics to achieve that vision. So involving people in deciding where are we going to plant trees, what species will be planted, who will take care of the trees, importantly, how and when, and what support do residents need and how can city government and NGOs provide it? So this is where we're going when we talk about equity. An example of this is the Garden of Healing, and this is in New Haven, Connecticut. This is a group of mothers who have all lost their children to gun violence. And the woman here on the far right, she had approached the Urban Resources Initiative because she wanted to commemorate her son who had died. And they said, well, why don't we plant a tree in his honor? And she said, no, me and the other mothers, we want something much bigger, something where anyone can come and commemorate the people that we've lost. And so they wanted to create a garden of healing. So the Urban Resources Initiative basically supported that vision for them. And the city committed in-kind resources and raised funds from the state. There were gifts from a graduate from Yale and other philanthropies that provided matching funds. And an architectural firm helped to design the garden, and volunteers worked to plant the garden. And I love this quote here from Colleen Murphy Dunning, who is the director of the Urban Resources Initiative. She said, the process never fundamentally strayed from our community forestry model. It was their idea. They wanted to create the space, and they had the ownership, rights, and responsibilities that come with that. So what are some of these strategies as we get into this discussion a little bit deeper to improve equity, specifically equity, providing these custom tools and resources to improve involvement and also outcomes for people in these neighborhoods where they've had historic disinvestment? One, I'm going to go through like 10 different things, and they'll be in order. So these are steps you can take. And I recommend kind of taking these steps in their order. And if you've done some of this, that's great. If you want to do some of these steps in the future, I think this would be a great starting point. So one is to learn about the diversity of the population in your area. You need to find where are the communities that are low canopy, where you have, and this is policy map. This is where you can go and look at demographics all the way down to the census tract level, looking at race and income and housing, how many renters and homeowners there are in a certain area. All of these different categories of demographics that you really want to make sure that you're aware of, so you know where do we need to be targeting our equity efforts. Another tool for that is the Tree Equity Score Analyzer. This is developed in the last few years by American Forests. They calculate a score on a scale of 0 to 100. And 100 means you've achieved tree equity, that the canopy is in great shape, and that you don't really need to worry about investing in those areas as much. But the lower scores, like this one here, this is from North Carolina. You can see this particular census tract has a tree equity score of 29, which is quite low. And you see how and why it's a low score. They have 100% people of color living there. The health index, which is self-reported prevalence of poor mental health, poor physical health, asthma, and heart disease, is an 83, which is quite high. So that means there's more of these issues in that area. The temperature index is quite high, and the people of poverty is also high. And at the same time, the current canopy at the bottom of the screen you see is only 14%. So all of these factors combine to create a low tree equity score. And this tool tells you that this community would be one that would benefit from more investment and more attention. So once you identify the specific communities or specific neighborhoods where you need to be like targeting your investments, the next thing to do is conduct a community relationship inventory. So in Holyoke, Massachusetts, where I did some work on the Urban Forest Equity Plan, there was a group called One Holyoke CDC. CDC stands for Community Development Corporation. This is a common type of organizational structure that you will find in many cities. So I would suggest wherever you live, you can search on the internet for community development corporations in your area and see which ones serve those low canopy communities that you're looking at engaging. There was also a group called Neighbor to Neighbor that we worked with in Holyoke. But what you can do is take inventory of the following types of organizations or community groups, or do that you already know of, or do a community or internet search for these as well. So Take stock of the neighborhood associations that you know about in these neighborhoods, or do an internet search for them. Churches, schools, chambers of commerce, garden clubs, and youth organizations. There's also a list that I'll pull up here from this link, which I will put into the chat as well. So I'll share the link in the chat box. And so this basically lists all different types of organizations, from addiction prevention recovery groups to heritage groups like the African American Heritage Society, hobby groups, men's groups, mentoring groups like Big Brothers, Big Sisters, all these different block clubs, neighborhood improvement groups. These are the kinds of terms you can use to search for these groups. It's a very comprehensive list. So I would take some time to basically take inventory, again, of these groups that you know about, or search for them in those areas where you have low canopy. Once you do that, you also want to do what's called snowball sampling for more contacts. So when you interact with a potential community leader, for instance, ask them, who else do you know in this community that I should talk to? And they can point you to potentially informal community leaders that may not be listed on a website somewhere, but are really important movers and shakers in a community. So keep a spreadsheet of each contact and who connected you to them. So it's kind of like doing a network map, but it's just a very simple tool that you can do on a spreadsheet and keep that list of contacts. So sometimes we think about the fact that we're doing tree inventories or inventories of different species of trees. This is doing an inventory of different community groups and different community members that need to be involved in the process. Once you have this kind of inventory, I think it's really important to interview community group members. And I've provided this questionnaire, so I'm going to copy the link and put it in the chat as well. This is a tool that you can use. And the questions include things like, how long have you been a part of this neighborhood? What's special about this neighborhood? What challenges are you facing here? What do you notice about the trees in this neighborhood? What would you like to see in the future with trees here? What concerns do you have about trees in this neighborhood? And what would you like to know more about regarding trees? So what I would suggest is taking detailed notes of key phrases or words that you hear people mention in their answers to these questions, or ask if you can audio record your conversation. You can get an app on your phone, you can get a digital audio recorder so that you can listen back to it later and make sure that you really captured someone's words accurately. And really what you can do is when you collect these responses from multiple people, you can start to highlight key themes and find what are the key things that are challenges in this neighborhood. Potentially, for example, people might have challenges that might not seem related to trees, like employment opportunities, but you can link it to trees. So for instance, if that's a really big concern, you could say, well, how can we collaborate to provide some employment opportunities in tree stewardship in this neighborhood to address that concern about employment opportunities, for instance. Another thing to do after you interview people and get a sense of what are their concerns, what are their priorities, is to design engagement strategies with community leaders. So you could convene an advisory council, or just you could invite people to a workshop that are community leaders that you've identified through your inventory. And you can design, this is for Holyoke, Massachusetts. This was during the height of the pandemic. So one of the issues was that we couldn't get people together in person. This was before vaccines were available. So we had to get very creative. We had virtual community forums, but we got a great tip from the community leaders. They said not to just use Zoom, but to actually use Facebook Live, because that was used more by the community. So doing these interviews with community leaders is really important to figure out what are the ways that people will engage with us and what are the ways that people will not engage with us. We also had online surveys. We had community leaders go to the grocery store and help people on tablets fill out the surveys. and go door to door with print copies. So we're really trying a multitude of different ways to reach people and reach a diversity of people in the low canopy communities. And one of the unique things we did was this call for selfies, where we basically asked people to take a picture of themselves in front of their favorite tree and to say why it was their favorite tree. And they were entered into a running to win a gift card to the grocery store. So this was Fernando, and he said, "This tree is my favorite because this was the first place that I visited in Holyoke after Hurricane Maria in 2017. This is the first tree that I saw with this beautiful color, the first time that I saw it in real life." So we're starting to, like, even just through this selfie contest, get a much better sense for what are people's priorities. What do people value about trees? What are their concerns about trees? There's any number of directions you could take with something like a selfie contest, that you could gather so much information from community residents about their relationships with trees and what they would like to see in the future. So really getting at that meaningful involvement. Also implementing interactive community outreach programs. This is the Community Green Space Program, which is also in New Haven, Connecticut. And they involve experiential and collaborative engagement. So when somebody approaches them and is interested in establishing their own community green space site, what they do is they set up tours of other green space sites so that people can see what's possible on their own site. They also have visits to local parks, and they have dialogue with people about what they see and what they would like to create in their own green space. They even provide print media like gardening magazines to offer inspiration and starting points for dialogue. So this is from a publication called Restorative Commons, creating health and well-being through urban landscapes. Also in Ann Arbor, we had providing, this is where you get to involving people in selecting the species of trees. So property owners who receive trees through their program are able to pre-select their trees from a list of available species and are provided information. This is really important, providing people with information about the tree. What is the tree going to look like? What are all these questions that people in Detroit had that were going sort of unanswered, that would have made them more accepting of trees, is finding out, well, how tall is this tree going to grow? What kind of benefits? What kind of maintenance is needed? And so Sean, the program administrator, does a site visit for each home and talks about the options with them, including pros and cons of each type of tree, like shade trees or fruit trees. And they make sure that the tree can do well in the area. So for example, one family's yard flooded frequently, so they chose a tree that does well in standing water. And this is the link. If you go to this, I will put it in the chat as well, the 10,000 Trees Initiative, and you scroll all the way to the bottom of the page, you'll see the tree education corner. And this is where they have all of their tree information cards, which is really, really useful. And if you look at any of them, it provides so much information, including planting the tree and caring for the tree. So this is a tool or a resource that I will provide in the chat as well. Another way that people are involved is throughout the process, and I really like this framework that was used for the city of Providence. It's not an urban forestry example, but it's a climate justice plan. And what they did was they really centered the community throughout the process. One first step they took was to define the roles for all involved. So making sure that everyone that you bring together knows how they can influence decisions that are being made. They provided information and resources to frontline communities. For example, they provided information about how the energy system works. In urban forestry, this might mean providing information to people about how the city conducts tree stewardship and maintenance, or who's doing all of the stewardship and where are there gaps and needs. They hosted Saturday workshops to discuss the problems and propose solutions. If you're going to do this, I would suggest making sure you have childcare or child activities, as well as food. They had peer-led interviews. This is really important. Thinking about who's trusted in the community. It might be neighbor to neighbor, conducting interviews of frontline community members. Frontline meaning these are people living in communities that are on the front lines of climate change and all of the negative impacts associated with it. They designed solutions based on the priorities and concerns of the frontline communities and presented initial policies and these future stories of what the community could look like if they follow certain policies. And then community members were given these stories, and they could note what they liked and what they didn't like. Then there was refinement and finalization of the policies based on community feedback with the project team. And there was ensured mutual agreement on policies before publishing the climate justice plan. So this is a very collaborative approach, and you could use this as basically a template format that you could follow for developing urban forest plans. Another thing we did in Ann Arbor was lead ward walks where people live, and we had pre-mapped walks, and volunteers would lead people on these walks. This is where your community networks are really, really important. When you've done that community inventory and those interviews of community leaders, you've started to build relationships with them, and they might be then willing to advertise and help lead these walks around the neighborhood. A part of equity is going where people are, not expecting them necessarily to come down to City Hall for a meeting, but actually going into their neighborhood and providing opportunities to engage in something like a walk where they go around and you say, what do you notice about trees? What would you like to see in the future? How could you help? Maybe people would say, well, I'm willing to help water the tree, but I need help with pruning the tree. That's really important to know so you can create a stewardship plan. This is another link I'll put in the chat. This is the link. If you go to this link, you'll come to our website. And basically, you just want to click on at the top of the page, the Ward Walks link. And then there's an observation form that you can click on. And you can see the questions we asked people. We had these online and print versions available. So I'll go ahead and put that link into the chat as well. Considering your invitation. So belonging begins with an invitation into a space, and how one is invited matters a great deal. A great invitation speaks to your audience with a clear purpose. So I would say consider the following questions when you're creating your invitation to any type of event that we've covered. Who does it come from? Who's trusted in the community? Who would people actually want to respond to? How findable is it? Is it just online? Is it somewhere like a grocery store where people frequent often? Does it require prior knowledge to understand? So trying to make it as clear as possible for anyone. Does it require specific technologies to view, like a QR code? And is access restricted in any way? So think about these questions and how to make your events and invitations as accessible as possible. Reflect on ways to be more inclusive. So environments that invite people in and create and celebrate opportunities for people to be their full selves are foundational to belonging in any community. So consider, what would this look like in real life? What might be included in creating and celebrating opportunities for people to be their full selves? For instance, instead of just celebrating Arbor Day, maybe we need to be celebrating other cultural holidays and other cultural traditions and values towards trees, and actually inviting people in to come and talk about their own cultural values and experiences with trees. How might you invite difference, thinking about different people, different behaviors, different responses into your work and your life? And I do want to kind of get through this a little quicker because we're sort of towards the end here and I don't want to belabor things. But it requires intentional actions and to ensure that there are shared values and standards of behavior and practices that support well-being. So basically, create or reevaluate your organization's core values, mission, and vision, and involve people in the process of doing that. There's a worksheet here that I'll link to. It's about how do we pivot from white supremacy culture over to something different. And I think it's a really valuable resource. So I'm going to go ahead and share that in the chat as well. So I do want to kind of get through this, the last few things, providing physical and material support for people. So make sure you give stakes, rope, mulch with trees. For older residents in Bridgeport, Nebraska, they had youth organizations deliver the tree and help plant the tree. They've talked about stump removal and helping with that through the city. And some people may not want to pay for watering, so they've talked about using the city watering cart as a service to help people water the trees. So this is part of equity as well. And facilitating workshops in other languages, where again, going where people live, offering childcare, children's activities, And while you're there, ask people about their experience. Did they enjoy the engagement activities? Are they more confident about participating in stewardship as a result? And the last idea here is really creative. It's talking about model building. So, this is where you could have people build a memory of a place, or you could have them build what their ideal space would look like using nothing but found objects. This could be things like pipe cleaners, Christmas ornaments, buttons, bottle caps, leaves, objects that anyone, regardless of background or learning style, can engage with to make their ideas come to life. I'm gonna skip through this because I think we're kind of at the tail end and I don't want to take too long. I want to ensure that there's time for questions. But if you want to read more about any of this as well, I have a book called Racist Roots: How Racism Has Affected Trees and People in Our Cities and What We Can Do About It. So it's on Amazon, but you can also email me if you want a signed copy or to schedule a book event. And if you want more help adding an equity lens to your urban forest management plans or designing community engagement strategies and facilitating equitable dialogue among diverse groups, I'm more than happy to talk to you about those services. And you can email me at christine@fairforest.com. But with that, I will wrap up and welcome any questions people have.
Thank you so very much. That was excellent. I am talking with my staff and talking about how they'd seen a previous presentation of yours, and this one was even better somehow than the last time they had seen it. So congrats for that. I wanted to remind people that you can feel free to share comments in the chat. And if you would like to submit questions for the Q&A, we would really appreciate it. You can do that through the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom window. But as I will now pull up my notes and start with, so this is a broader question, and we'll maybe dig a little bit into it, or you can let me know how deep we should dig into it. But I really, really appreciated the visual that you had that was talking about the differences between equity and equality and, you know, but specifically, I'm thinking about equity and justice. And when you think about equity, I'm thinking of the on the ground groups, the nonprofits, the folks that are trying actively to address these inequalities and these, differences in access for things. And the justice really requires going kind of up the ladder, if that makes sense, and making more systematic changes. This is policy changes. This is major funding priority changes, et cetera. And I can imagine that there are people in the audience today that are thinking, oh my gosh, I am so focused on trying to do the on the ground work that I don't even feel like I have the capacity to go up the ladder and try to work on the actual justice component. How do we make the space that we're operating within more conducive to effective work, right? And to doing this work and even solving some of the problems that our organizations are tasked with solving. So I wanted to ask you if you had any advice or thoughts on folks that are really interested in the justice component, but that find themselves steeped in the equity work and have a hard time visioning how they can be effective in changing things systematically, right? If they don't have the resources or the power structures available to them to do that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I think it all starts with requesting dialogue with whoever the people in those positions of power over policy are. And you can even present them with that document I shared. I think I shared all the links in the chat. Originally, I accidentally shared it with just panelists. So hopefully now everyone has access to the links in the chat. But there was one about white supremacy culture. And it's talking about all these different tenets of white supremacy culture and how we can pivot and what's the alternative. And I think that's a really great document to bring to a discussion with leaders of an organization or whoever's in charge of policy, to then have a conversation and go through that and say, here's what I've noticed in my work on the ground. We have this problem where we tend to make decisions for people instead of with people, and we want to switch to more of a co-design approach. How can we then talk about policies that will help us achieve that? Maybe it's making sure that there's dedicated steps in the process where people are able to influence decisions, and going through a checklist of what are all the points in the process where we make decisions that we need to be involving people in the community more. So I think it's important to think about working with those leaders, of whoever's in the policy position, having honest discussion about what you're seeing out in the field, what's working, what's not working. And then hopefully from there, you can start to craft policies that will change the system.
Absolutely. And I know that there are groups that, focus more specifically on advocacy, and even groups that get together, organizations doing like-minded work, that are saying, we as the folks that are doing the on the ground work are talking to you, the funders and the policymakers, and saying, this is what we're seeing on the ground, and this is how things need to change to make our work more effective. And so, yeah, it is an interesting balance, but I really appreciate that. And it sounds, what I'm hearing there is, documenting and being able to illustrate the feelings of the community and the dynamics of the work environments that we're in with our organizations is really important, not only for our own learning, but also for, conveying that to our funders and to our policymakers, and saying, this is what we're seeing, this is how we're addressing it, this is why, just to use an example, let's talk about the plastic bottle manufacturers and not making every individual recycle them. And you know what I mean? It's just like, work upstream, make it more efficient. Let's think about how these things can be more effective, because then your dollars as a policymaker or a funder go much further.
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. And we're just wanted to say that we're getting a lot of really good feedback in the chat, so super appreciate it. And I'll just pop in here. We maybe have time for one or two more questions. I'd love to encourage everybody in the session today to please submit your Q&As if you are interested in having them discussed today. And so I wanted to talk about the idea of defining roles. I think that was a really interesting thing to think about. So when you're defining roles within a community, how do you be both, I guess, how do you say, like, realistic about the opportunities that exist, but also ambitious about what the future opportunities or influence could be, right? Because I wouldn't want to go into community, for example, and make it seem like it was going to be super easy to influence policy or influence the landscape that we work within. But at the same time, I want them to be excited about the opportunities and feeling like there's agency and an ability to make a difference. And so I guess I'm interested in how you balance kind of like being pragmatic in some of these spaces versus being really ambitious and kind of forward thinking, establishing new expectations and new realities.
I think it's helpful if you can document and maybe outline who's responsible for, because sometimes in neighborhoods, people don't know who's making what decisions, but they're very familiar with the impacts of the decisions on themselves. So I think if someone from a nonprofit or a city government can even provide a map of like an organizational chart saying, here's for street trees, we have this decision making structure where the city technically has authority, and the nonprofit, we can give them power to on behalf of the city to plant trees here, for instance. And then the nonprofit could say yes, and on that front, we have the ability to allow residents in the process at these junctures, at deciding where should we prioritize, because there's so many opportunities for decision making to be opened to the residents and to the people that are most affected. So it's like presenting like an organizational chart and saying, here's how the decisions are currently made, and here's the possibilities for where you could influence those decisions. It may not have happened yet, but it's legally possible. So that, I think, having like an outline, for example, like I just said, street trees are the responsibility of the city, but the city is able to give that power to the nonprofit, and the nonprofit can share power with the residents, so that together we can decide where should we prioritize tree planting, or what types of trees for what purposes are we going to plant trees. And so I think, it's really important to be very transparent with people about what is the current system for making decisions about trees in all the different spaces, the street trees, the park trees, the residential areas, who's responsible? And it may sound straightforward, like, oh, everyone knows that property owners are responsible for trees, but that might not be the case. People may not understand, who's responsible and who has power over which trees. And so I think just even going over that together and again being very clear, like, here's where you could help influence the process, and offering those opportunities to people and asking them, how would you like to influence the process, is a really good way to go. And I think sometimes we just don't go take that extra step of explaining to people, the organizational chart and who's responsible for what. But I think that could be a really useful step in the process. Oh, I think you're muted there, Rob.
I said absolutely. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you to everybody that participated in today's session. I will now move into our outros very briefly, and then we do have another webinar coming up after this, so we will jump off just before the top of the hour. But yes, Christine, thank you so much. This was really great, and we're getting a lot of great feedback in the chat, so we appreciate you. So I
My
am
pleasure.
now jumping in here. So we encourage you to become a regular of our monthly webcast. So please do join us on the second Wednesday of every month in the Eastern Time Zone's noon hour. And we'd like to go through a couple of the upcoming ones. So we have Denise Keeley with of the Michigan Climate Action Network with Stewardship is Climate Action. And that's coming up next month. And then in September, we have Rethinking Kirtland's Warbler Conservation with Bill Rapai of the Kirtland's Warbler Alliance. Then we have Volunteer Stewardship Tips and Tricks from a Super Volunteer with Emily Leslie and Wayne Gleber of Michigan DNR. Once again, we'd like to remind you to please visit stewardshipnetwork.org/donate, and don't forget to contribute if you can. The $10,000 match will end at the end of July, so please do contribute before then if you are able. And lastly, thank you. These webcasts would not happen without all of you, so we really appreciate you giving your time to us, and we hope to see you next month. Thanks a lot. Take care.